And the Sunday Times has an exclusive report this morning that President Emmanuel Macron will be making a state visit to the UK next month. As Britain tries to chart this path between Donald Trump's increasingly isolationist America and the ethical concerns over doing business with China, does this visit suggest that the government is actually leaning towards closer trade ties with Europe after all? Well, joining us now is Eleonore Caroit, MP for President Macron's Renaissance Party and the Vice President of the Foreign Affairs Committee in the French National Assembly. Good morning, Eleonore.
Good morning. Thank you for having me.
Thank you so much for being here this morning. So, Eleonore, how important is this news of a really quite imminent state visit from President Macron in terms of Anglo-French relations right now?
Well, I think the Anglo-French relations right now are at a very good point. I would say the best point since Brexit and perhaps one of the best in their history, because we realize that we have common interest and that we are interested in defending Ukraine and ensuring that it is not surrendered. So I think it's a great news, but it's also not a surprising one when you look at what has happened in the past weeks between Emmanuel Macron and Prime Minister Keir Starmer.
You mentioned the Ukraine there. I mean, how much of this is about forging very strong links in the wake of quite unstable and unpredictable messaging out of America in terms of their support for Ukraine?
That's absolutely the case. We, of course, need to build on a new relationship after Brexit, and this is something that has been going on for almost a decade now. But there's also the Ukraine topic that it's an urgent one, and the fact that the US is deciding to back off, and before that to have a position on the negotiation that was not acceptable to Europe and to the UK has also accelerated this general movement of, a closeness between the European Union and the UK.
Now, we also need to talk about trade because obviously the UK has been debating internally, what is the best course of action for the country to take in terms of relationships and trade. We've obviously had a trading relationship with America. We have had a different trading relationship in recent years than we used to have with the EU. In France, is this being seen as very symbolic in terms of a pivot back to closer relationships with the EU in terms of trade?
Well, to us, watching what happened on the other side of the channel has been a very interesting experience because up until I would say 2018, there were people in France that were for a Frexit. They're no longer the case. It's no longer the case because we've seen how the UK exports to the EU have fallen and also how this is affecting your economy. And so I think increasing trade between the EU and the UK is something that we understand, that we would welcome. And we are also looking for stronger trade partners in the context of the US tariffs. So this is something that seems necessary. It's perhaps not an easy talk to have because we still have key points that are difficult, such as fisheries, for instance. But I think we will get there eventually and that these conversations need to take place.
Well, it's interesting you just mentioned fisheries because I was going to come on to say you don't get something for nothing. And if we want closer relationships with the EU, what does the EU need from us?
Well, for one thing, that the EU fishing fleets are continued to be accepted in your waters. I think that's one of the key requests. I don't know where that stands, but this is something that has been a problem in the past. Let's see whether this is also on the table. And there's also the fact that we need to build a defense industry at the EU level, but that would include also Britain. So I know there's an interest on your side of the channel for being part of that defense pact. Let's see also where we can land, because the idea is not for Britain to come back to the EU. That's not on the table on either side, but it's to have a deal that really reflects the reality, the fact that we have a community of interest in most topics.
And what about migration? How much of that is going to be part of the negotiation deal? With looking at small boat crossings, what happens in Calais. We were talking yesterday on the programme about potentially having a hub in a Balkans country. Migration is inevitably going to be part of this, isn't it?
Absolutely. And to be fair, we're already having discussions on a bilateral level between the UK and France on migration because there is a need to control what is happening in the channel. All these illegal migrants crossing the channel in small boats with the tragedies that we see every week is something that is unbearable on both sides. And so the talks that are taking place over the migrants return deal right now between France and the UK are also very welcome. And I hope they land somewhere and we're able to have a fair and balanced deal.
Do you think that France would support something like I don't know how much you know about the proposal that we discussed yesterday, but the idea was that we'd have a returns hub in the Balkans so that the exhausting of asylum applications would mean that they were returned to the Balkans and then dispersed either to another country or stayed there long term. Is that the sort of programme that France perhaps could get behind?
I don't know what the official position of France is. I don't even know if there's been an expression on that from the French government at this stage, but I'll give you my personal position. I think these deals are difficult to put in place, practically speaking. We had this with the Rome agreements at the EU level, and it was extremely difficult to send back the migrants to actually ensure that once their fingerprints were taken, they would stay in the country that we're supposed to treat their asylum. And it also made a great deal of pressure on the countries that are the first gates to Europe. So I'm not, I won't say I'm against it, but I would say that we would need to check the feasibility. Whilst the deal that we're talking about, the Calais Channel deal, seems more, at least it seems easier to actually put in place and control because it would only depend on France and the UK.
I just want to ask you before I let you go about the relationship between President Macron and the King, because obviously the state visit comes at the invitation of the government, but he will be hosted by the King. And I'm very interested that the King and President Macron already have what seems to be quite a warm relationship. They actually call each other on the phone. Now, France is a diehard republic, but your president and our King apparently speak regularly on the phone. What can you tell us about that friendship?
Well, indeed, I think there's a really good relationship between President Macron and the King, as there was with the Queen before that. So I would say that, of course, we're a diehard republic, but we, like other countries' monarchs, we don't mind them, and we're happy to discuss them and build strong relationships because ultimately what matters is that the people get along and that the interests that we have in common are addressed and that we work together towards a stronger and more independent Europe.
How different is that relationship now to, say, 8 years ago or even 5 years ago with the UK?
Well, there's been a great deal of shift in the relationship. We felt, at least I felt a bit betrayed when you decided to leave Europe because that was a construction that we'd made together and seeing you walk away. I mean, you've always had this very Atlantic vision, but it was something that was not easy to understand. And I think there was a period where the relationship was not great. And right now, seeing that we're working together towards Europe protection, again Ukraine, our common interests in trade is something that I really welcome, and that gives me hope that this relationship is broader and stronger than simply the UK-EU relationship. There's a real a friendship and history together between our two countries.
So would you say you've forgiven our betrayal now, Eleanor?
It was the way to say it, right? Of course, it's not a real betrayal, but of course, and there's nothing to forgive. It's just a history